Good morning. The question in front of us this week is a question that's pretty common and often misunderstood. In fact, if I'm going to be honest, the verses that this question sort of revolves around tend to be the liberals' favorite verses in the Bible. Consequently, they're the fundamentalist, probably most ignored verses in the Bible. And so they're kind of polarized in one sense. The question comes to us this way. The Bible tells us not to judge others. But when Jesus sent the disciples out, he said, quote, "By their fruits you'll know them." So we are given permission to judge people's fruit. What does the Bible mean by do not judge others? So the background for this is Matthew chapter 7. Toward the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said, "Judge not that you be not judged. For with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you see the speck that's in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that's in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when there's the log in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Do not give dogs what is holy. Do not throw your pearls before pigs, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you." Now, oftentimes people hear this, and the fundamentalist needs to be reminded that Jesus actually meant something by this, that he is telling you not to judge your brother, that he is telling you not to judge your sister. He's telling you to not give into this aspect of judgment, which is the word krino, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And yet, the questioner points out that the Bible tells us about judging and assessing fruits and looking at false teachers in particular, which is the context of the "by your fruits you'll know them." And we need to be able, in that sense, to judge and to adjudicate. And the Bible seems to point that that kind of a judgment is okay. So what does it mean to say you shall not judge? I mean, the moment you say something about something, a lifestyle being wrong, individuals will look and say, "Who are you to judge? Who are you to judge?" And it's literally the non-believer's favorite verse in all of Scripture. Interestingly, the text is kind of indicating about relationships, it looks like, between believers, or between people we would call brothers and so forth. Now, it could be the audience here is largely people who the brother or sister is probably a fellow Jew in that context. But what I want to do is explain a couple of things about judgment as it's laid out in Scripture. So the first thing you should probably note is that when we use the word judge, there's two senses in which we can use the same word. And you got a bunch of Scripture that backs this up. So one sense is in the sense of condemn. Think legislatively, to pass judgment upon someone. So in texts like John 3:17, 5:21, 12:48, 16:11, 18:31, Acts 7:7, Acts 13:27, Revelation 6:10, we see this idea of condemn. Now, it's God's responsibility ultimately to bring that kind of condemnation in judgment. In fact, as it relates to a believer, the Bible tells us there is now no condemnation for you, Romans chapter 8, verse 1. But judging in terms of condemning is certainly something that a believer ought not do to another believer. It's certainly something we ought not do in the sense that that's not given to us here in this life, here and now, to be the legislators of condemnation. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not assessors, which brings us to the second use of the term krino. First, it can mean condemn, but second, it can mean something like to appraise or to evaluate. It's used this way in Luke 7:43, 12:57, Acts 3:13, Acts 4:19, 15:19, 16:14. It's used this way in a few places in 1 Corinthians, often in reference to ideas and actions or assessing something, right? So we do have the responsibility to be a people who are assessing. I mean, we're told to assess ourselves, certainly. We're certainly told to minister to others. We're told to rebuke and correct others. We're told to take the text of Holy Scripture and use it and apply it to the lives and hearts of others. And so there is a clear sense in which we are called to be our brother's keeper, right? I mean, in a sense, this is what Cain's sort of language that was used differently, but Cain's language comes to bear. Like, no, I actually have a responsibility for my brother. That includes bearing his burdens, Galatians chapter 6, but it also includes admonishing one another. That's a biblical one another. There's the scripture that's given to me for training, for correction, for rebuke. And so I have that responsibility. And yet I'm not supposed to go around throwing around condemnation. I'm not supposed to look, particularly when it comes to texts like Romans 14 and so forth, I'm not to look at someone else's preferences. Maybe Bob drinks beer. My job isn't to condemn Bob for drinking a beer. My job isn't to look and say, Bob went to this concert or Bob went to this movie, and to all of a sudden legislate judgment on Bob's life. Sorry if your name's Bob. Legislate judgment because he used his freedom in a particular way. That doesn't mean that I'm supposed to close my eyes to serious issues of morality. But it also does, and as Jesus sort of gives teeth to his understanding of what judgment means, he does caution us against, even when it comes to sin issues, that we're real quick to step in and point out something someone is doing wrong when we're guilty of things similar or maybe even things greater. We need to be careful that we would stay away from, as it were, condemnation. Listen to James chapter 4, verse 11 through 12 in this regard. James writes, "Do not speak evil against one another, brothers. The one who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks evil against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you're not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is only one lawgiver and judge, he who is able to save and to destroy, but who are you to judge your neighbor?" If you find yourself having a disposition where you are like a sin sniffer, you're looking for someone else to mess up, you're going to be the one to point it out when they mess up because you think that you have a responsibility somehow to be the arbiter of individual and maybe even communal holiness. What James is saying is, slow down. Don't take God's seat of judgment. That is left for God alone. It is not yours to take. You are not the one who legislates to them. What that means then is a couple of things. When we come to our brother or sister, our role is to assess our own hearts so that we don't fall prey to condemnation. Our role is to come to them in love. Our role is to come to them not condemning, but correcting in love and being patient with them, right? So admonish one another becomes an extension of love one another, properly understood in the Bible. We have to be a people who are willing to correct each other, but not a people who jump to condemning, to pointing out, or to taking sort of the moral catbird's seat, if you will. We have to be very careful of this. So we have to be guarded in that way. Now, again, that doesn't mean we don't assess teaching. It doesn't mean we don't assess ideas. And it doesn't mean we don't assess actions at times and recognize when they are out of bounds. Otherwise, we wouldn't have these exhortations in the Bible to correct and admonish one another and to hold one another accountable. So Jesus' warning is, don't condemn. And when you step in, don't be the kind of person that snaps into adjudicating something without looking at yourself and assessing yourself honestly, and not being able to have hypocrisy attributed to you. So, properly understood, this passage and this concept of judgment frees us from the liberal tendency to say, who are you to judge? Well, we are called to assess morality. We're called to assess it individually and culturally. And yet it helps us not swing all the way over to the fundamentalist notion either, where we don't have much to say at all now. We just kind of ignore the idea that sometimes it's an error to step in, to ultimately slander, to impute motive, and to accuse people from the catbird seat. So we have to sit here with both of these tensions, not condemn, but be given to appraisal, and to hold that in measure with grace. May the Lord bless you, may He encourage you, and may you traffic in your human relationships in a way that would reflect the character of Christ as He is trying to get after in the Sermon on the Mount. Take care.